Hello, I'm Johanna Schukert, Voices Interim Executive Director. It's a pleasure for us to host this community chat on an introduction to Voices strategic plan and race equity transformation, which is part of Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. The mission of the week is to empower the voices and experiences of marginalized communities in acknowledgement of truth to promote healing, reconciliation, and justice. As an organization that works to improve the lives of Virginia's children, the partners, community members, passionate advocates, and the public officials with whom we collaborate makes this work possible. In addition, as a child advocacy organization, the needs of the community are constantly shifting and changing. We are pleased to introduce you to our plan as an organization to move forward in responding to the needs we have identified. With me today is Cece Clark, a member of our board of directors.
Thank you, Johanna. I'm privileged to be involved in this conversation today and privileged to be involved with Voices, where I've been a board member for about the last 3 years, and I'm pleased to support Voices in the wonderful work done for children across the state.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Chloe Edwards. I work on Voices campaign for Trauma-Informed Virginia and then the lead staff member on Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to introduce everyone to Voices strategic plan as it embodies many of the themes of the week. Let's go ahead and kick it off with the first question I have for you, Johanna. You have been familiar with Voices for over a decade. Tell us more about your work with the organization and how the landscape of the organization has shifted across several years.
Sure. I've actually been familiar with the organization since it began in 1994. As a former director of an organization that dealt with child abuse and neglect and did a lot of public policy work in that area. Prior to Voices' inception, there were organizations that worked with foster care and adoption, children's health and mental health, early childhood education, and so forth. And we all worked in those areas separately. And as Voices grew as an organization, they were able to act as conveners to bring together the organizations that worked in all of those fields. And together, we have been able to create a louder voice and a common agenda, which is much more successful with public policymakers. So I have seen that evolution over the years. And today, the coalitions that work together with Voices to meet the needs of children through public policy advocacy is extraordinary. So I'm grateful that the organization has stepped up and has been able to be recognized now as the go-to organization for leadership in the areas relating to marginalized children, and also the lead organization for data that supports the key elements of our agendas.
Mm-hmm. Well, in your tenure, Johanna, you've definitely been a part of a lot of strategic planning processes, and they're so important to determine the right direction for an organization. What exactly influenced Voices' strategic planning process and the results that came from it?
Well, a strategic plan is really a roadmap for an organization. It gives structure and direction to an organization's work. And it was determined that after, I think, the last strategic plan expired, it was time to set a new direction. So we worked with SparkMill to gather information internally and externally. The data was disaggregated to identify trends. And as a result, the trends outlined key needs for our organization and for the demographics we serve during the next 3 years. So those trends are outlined in our strategic plans, key strategies, and tactics.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the areas of focus for this strategic plan. It covers the years 2020 to 2022. What are those areas of focus that came from those trends?
Sure, there are 3 major areas. The first is to promote effective child-centric statewide policies and laws. The second is to empower local communities who guide laws and policies that affect the lives of children and families. And the third is for equity to be centered in our work internally and externally.
Mhm. And that's why I'm so pleased to have board member Cece Clark here, who can talk about her relationship to equity. Cece, tell us, how did equity become a theme of the strategic plan? How did Voices know it was an important item? And how have you been taking the lead on Voices to implement that?
Well, it's a lens that the board recognized really with the lead of staff. So the staff helped bring us to this. And it's a lens that we need to apply internally. It's a lens that we need to apply externally. So essentially, in order to be effective with children, in order to do and continue to do great things for children and families across the state, we need to make sure that we are looking at things with a lens of equity. If we're thinking about equitable outcomes, if we're thinking about justice, we absolutely need to ensure that that starts first internally within Voices, right? We have to make sure that there's a good understanding. We have to make sure there's a good application, and that's just something that we live and breathe. Board, we did some education on this together to make sure that we understood what do we mean when we say equity, and why is equity important? And that was really the impetus for a greater understanding among board members and a realization that that absolutely needs to be a thread throughout everything in the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm. And what role have you been playing at the board level to implement that?
Yeah, so good question. In addition to participating in that learning, lots of conversations within board meetings, within board committees as well, beginning to think about, as we think about board governance, what does equity mean, right? How do we make sure that we have a board that represents the state of Virginia? As we talk with staff, how do we make sure that we're understanding what they're doing and how it needs to be done so that we can do our part as board members? And so I've been having conversations with staff members, having conversations with board members, participating in some of those meetings, such as governance, to make sure that we apply that equity lens as a board.
What influenced the first area of focus, Johanna, effective child-centric statewide policies and laws?
Well, the first area of focus is a large component of Voices' mission. And as an organization, our goal is to educate public policy officials by expanding their knowledge of policies that address the needs of children and families. But through data analysis, we're able to further elevate the need and address the equity impact, as well as create equitable policy solutions for children and families. And in fact, all of our advocacy efforts.
Mm-hmm. So Voices is a statewide organization. What influenced the organization's desire to empower local communities who guide laws and policies that affect the lives of children and families?
Well, through the strategic planning process, Voices communicated with stakeholders to identify their needs, because this helps guide us in terms of our roadmap and that is effective during the next 3 years. As an advocacy organization, we don't provide direct service, but we do work with direct service providers, as well as state policy stakeholders through our coalitions. Through their feedback, we recognized that there was an increased need for both state advocacy, but also a need for local community empowerment. The community-centric piece of the strategic plan is imperative, as we recognize that the mission of our organization directly impacts members of the community with lived experiences who are in need of greater access to things like quality mental health services, permanency, normalcy, children who are in need of quality access to early education, and more. And with the support and guidance from our stakeholders who serve members of the community, and through trust building and engagement as an organization with youth and families who are impacted by our mission, we're able to mobilize families and children to influence the change they hope to see in their communities. We feel it's important to empower families and children to see their desired outcomes, because these outcomes directly impact them. So we have found it really exciting to begin moving from an outreach position with communities to truly an engagement position, so that we are engaging and empowering people at the local level to help us educate their policymakers about changes that need to happen that will directly affect them as voters.
So equity is definitely a cross-cutting issue. How does equity being at the center of Voices work internally and externally influence all of the work that Voices does? Cece, I'm sure you have some insight on that.
Well, one of the many great things about Voices is that we host Virginia's Kids Count data center, where we do research, we aggregate data, we crunch numbers about things that are important for us all to know about kids in order to serve kids well. And through that data set, we know that 47% of children in Virginia are children of color. So in order for Voices to adopt principles of equity in all of our programs, we're in the process of really a race equity transformation. We've developed a race equity assessment plan. We have to monitor our growth as an organization. We have to hold ourselves accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So in all of our work, we use data as a guide. It shapes our goals, and through our strategic plan, we use the data also to guide the internal workings of the organization to make sure that there's internal race equity within the organization. So in order to really do the work well, we've just really acknowledged the need to ensure that equitable practices are practiced internally and externally. So we hope that other organizations will also adopt this practice. So we hope we'll be setting a bit of a trend here to promote just and equitable outcomes for people of color and their staff, but also for those that are ultimately impacted by the mission of each of the organizations.
Right. We're setting an example and definitely hope that others will adopt. We're definitely not perfect, but we have a lot of work to do. And I'm grateful from the leadership level to the staff level, everyone's putting in the work to do that. Thank you, Johanna and Cece, for introducing everyone participating in Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week to the direction that Voices is moving in 2020 to 2022. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I would like to add my thanks to the host of public policy leaders, to community leaders, leaders from a variety of organizations and agencies who are participating in this series. This has grown into a series of interactive conversations that we hope will expand our knowledge, but also serve as a beginning for ongoing conversations. So thanks to everyone who became interested in the idea and who are now involved in making that a reality.
And I would just say thank you for including me in the conversation. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens as we engage with other organizations around the state.
Thank you. For more information, visit vakids.org. You can follow us on social media, facebook.com/racialtruth, and on all of the Voices for Virginia's Children platforms, VA Kids on all social media, but Instagram, VA_kids. Click the Racial Truth and Reconciliation page on our website to get involved in all the opportunities for engagement this week. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing the outcome.